dear students, this is Somasundari. Today we are discussing about History Unit 2. The topic is Political Developments in South America. Before starting the class, I'll ask few questions from previous topic. Are you ready? Okay, let's start. Question number 1. The discovery of gold in Transvaal in dash. The discovery of gold in Transvaal in dash. Answer is 1886. 1886. Question number 2. The Boer War lasted for 3 years. The Boer War lasted for 3 years dash. 1899 to 1902. 1899 to 1902. The African National Congress founded in dash. Question number 3. The African National Congress founded in dash. Answer is 1912. 1912. Question number 4. Mandela became the first black president of dash. Mandela became the first black president of dash. Answer is South Africa. South Africa. Next, the Boer War took place between the Boers and the dash. The Boer War took place between the Boers and the dash. Answer is British. British. Next, the ANC leader Nelson Mandela was put behind the bars of dash years. The ANC leader Nelson Mandela was put behind the bars of dash years. Answer is 27. 27. Children, I hope you are all got correct answer, isn't it? Well done. Now, we are discussing about today's topic, political developments in South America.
The Maya. They're considered one of the most advanced civilizations to have existed in the Americas before the Spanish conquest. But who exactly were the ancient Maya people, and what led to the collapse of their civilization? As early as 1800 BC, the Maya had begun settling and established villages in what is today Mexico and Central America. Maya civilization peaked from 250 to 900 AD, during what archaeologists call the Classic period. More than 40 cities flourished throughout the region, with populations as large as 50,000. The Maya built magnificent urban centers consisting of stone structures, including pyramid temples that were central to Maya religious practices. In addition to these impressive city structures, agriculture played a key role in Maya civilization. Corn was one of the predominant crops. The Maya creation story tells of nature gods, the basis of Maya religion, who created humans out of yellow and white corn. The Maya also made significant advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They invented the concept of zero, and they developed an accurate calendar system. Used to guide the Maya agricultural cycles, the calendar was based on observations of the sun and sky over thousands of years. The Maya also developed the only known system of writing in Mesoamerica, hieroglyphs. In fact, Much of what we know about ancient Maya civilization comes from deciphering hieroglyphic characters inscribed in pottery, stone slabs, and other ruins discovered at ancient sites. Hieroglyphs have revealed that, despite the Mayas' ingenuity and agrarian lifestyle, conflict was prevalent among some Maya city-states as they battled for control of the region. Throughout much of the Classic period, the city-state of Tikal, located in modern-day Guatemala, reigned as the closest thing to an empire in Maya history. But for a period of roughly 130 years, the Tikal people were overtaken through force and diplomacy by the Kanul, a rival kingdom. Toward the end of the Classic period, around 900 AD, most Maya cities had collapsed. Among the theories are warfare, a volcanic eruption, and, perhaps most likely, drought. However, archaeologists still debate why, as new evidence continues to emerge. Despite the decline of ancient Maya civilization, the Maya people have by no means disappeared. More than 7 million Maya are estimated to be alive today in their indigenous homelands and around the world. While they participate in modern global life, they continue to follow agricultural and ceremonial practices of their ancestors.
First, I'll explain Mayas and Aztecs. Before the European discovery of America, 3 centers of civilizations existed there in Mexico in Central America and in Peru in South America. The Maya, the Inca and Aztec civilizations were highly advanced. There were several states in each of these areas of civilization. Well organized and strong governments existed. Around the 11th century, large cities formed into a league of Mayapan. What is the meaning of Mayapan? Sendra's Maya civilization of Native Americans, American Indians. For over 100 years, the League of Mayapan lasted. Though Mayapan was destroyed towards the close of 12th century, other cities continued. Aztecs from Mexico conquered the Maya country in the 14th century and founded their capital, city of Tenochtitlan. For nearly 200 years, the Aztecs ruled their empire. Next, European colonization and its impact. In the 16th century, when the Aztecs were the height of their power, the whole empire collapsed before a handful of adventurers led by a Spaniard named Hernan Cortes. Mexican civilization collapsed. Within the great city of Tenochtitlan also perished. This is one of the world's worst genocides. The other famous conqueror was also Spaniard by name Francisco Pizarro, who led the conquest of the Incan Empire. Later, the Spaniards made Peru a part of their dominions. Who are Aztecs? The Aztecs were a military nation. They had military colonies and garrisons and a network of military roads. There was outward security and peace in the empire, but people were ruthlessly oppressed and exploited. By the late 18th century, demand for political freedom, administrative autonomy, and economic self-determination was articulated throughout Latin America. There were bloody conflicts between Haitian slaves, colonists, the armies of the British, and the French colonizers. These struggles, led by Toussaint L'Ouverture during 1791 to 1804, ended in the Haitian people's independence from the colonial control of France. Haiti thus became the first Caribbean country to throw off slavery and French colonial control.
When Spanish ships landed in Mexico in 1519, the mighty Aztec Empire was at the height of its power. From their capital at Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs controlled much of what is now Mexico and Central America, ruling some 15 million people. Aztec palaces were as vast and sophisticated as any of those in Europe, and their temples rivaled the Egyptian pyramids. But within just 2 years, the mighty Aztec Empire crumbled, and Tenochtitlan lay in ruins after a brutal siege led by Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. No great ancient civilization ever fell so far, so fast. What happened to the Aztecs? For one thing, they had too many enemies. For years, the Aztecs used brutal force against neighboring tribes and city-states, forcing them to pay costly tributes and hand over victims for the human sacrifices central to the Aztec religion. Cortés turned these people's hatred of the Aztecs to his advantage. Spanish invaders also had superior weapons, plus guns, trained horses and dogs, and fully loaded warships that allowed them to overcome the Aztecs' greater numbers. Ineffective leadership also played a role in the fall of the Aztecs. Their emperor, Montezuma, believed Cortés might be the bearded Aztec god who was prophesied to conquer his people and bring universal peace. Unsure how to confront the Spanish leader, he was captured in 1520 and was later killed, possibly by his own people. His brother Cuitlahuac took over, leading an army that drove the Spaniards from Tenochtitlan. But the Aztecs then confronted another powerful enemy, smallpox. Brought aboard Spanish ships, the disease decimated the Aztec population, killing the new emperor and thousands of others. With the help of several thousand Indians, including Texcocans, Chalca, and Tepanec, Cortés and his Spanish force besieged Tenochtitlan, cutting off the city's water and food supplies. Despite a fierce resistance, the Aztec city fell on August 13, 1521. More than 200,000 people died in the struggle. With the Aztec Empire effectively destroyed, Cortés became governor and captain general of New Spain in 1522. Under Spanish rule, Mexico City rose from the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and Christianity spread throughout the region, replacing the temples and traditions of a once great ancient civilization.
Students, now I explain impact of Napoleonic invasion of Spain and Portugal. The American and French revolutions provided inspiration to the Latin Americans. The Napoleonic invasion of Spain and Portugal in 1808 quickened the process of liberation struggle in South America. Already, the spirit of independence was growing under the leadership of Simon Bolivar, called El Liberator. The Liberator, in the case of Brazil, the Portuguese royal family in the context of conquest of Portugal by Napoleon fled from Lisbon and thereby assisted the transition of Brazil from colony to independent nation. Pedro I, renouncing the claim to the Portuguese throne, declared independence of Brazil. The Monroe Doctrine. The fight of independence intensified when Napoleon fell in 1815. Some of the European kings wanted to help the kings of Spain to crush the revolutionaries in the South American colonies. But Monroe, the doctrine of the USA, came up with his famous Monroe Doctrine, which declared that European interfered anywhere in America, north or south, it would amount to waging a war against the United States. This threat frightened the European powers. By 1830, the whole of South America was free from European domination. Thus, the US protected the South American republics from Europe, but there was no one to protect from the protector, the United States. Disunity among Latin American nationalists. The Latin American nationalists fought not only the Spain and Portugal, but also each other. In 1821, Central America ceded from Mexico. Later, Central America itself split into 5 republics. Uruguay split from Brazil in 1828. In 1830, Peninsula, the Ecuador ceded from Gran Colombia, the republic created by Bolivar. Next, US interest in imperialism. At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States had occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. After defeating the Spanish in 1898, from 1898 to 1902, Cuba was under US military rule. When the Americans finally left, they retained a naval station in Cuba. The US also retained its right to intervene in Cuban internal affairs. President Theodore Roosevelt's attitude to Latin America countries was summed up in the words, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The Monroe Doctrine had barred European interference in the affairs of the American continent. Roosevelt made an important amendment to the doctrine in 1904. It authorized US intervention in Latin America in order to maintain order. After effecting this amendment, the US became the dominant influence not only politically but also in economics.
Do you remember this?
Manifest Destiny is a belief tied to Christian origins in America. It states that we are predestined by God to settle land out to the Pacific Ocean. We have a divine right to claim Mexican and Indian lands. American imperialism was a period between the 1890s and the 1910s when America, fueled by Manifest Destiny, extended its political, military, and economic control over weaker territories. The idea of Manifest Destiny told us to spread our Anglo-Saxon heritage from coast to coast. Once the western border was closed by the Pacific Ocean, we needed to find new territories to spread our beliefs and values.
3 factors fueled U.S. imperialism. The first is a desire for greater military strength. The second was a search for new markets. And the third was a belief in our cultural superiority. For several decades now, the major powers of Europe and Asia had engaged in an age of empire. They vied for control of colonies in the Americas, in Africa, and in Asia. If the United States truly wanted to be a world power, it must catch up to the rest and claim an empire.
First, let's talk about the desire for military strength. To compete in the world, the US needed a dominant military. We needed to combine industry, innovation, resources, and strategic territories. Admiral Alfred Mahan created a plan for US military dominance. First, we needed to build a modern navy. We created steam-powered and steel-hulled cruisers in order to compete with other nations across the world. We called this navy the Great White Fleet due to the fact that the hulls were painted white. Next, he desired to acquire Hawaii. This would create a naval base in the Central Pacific that would allow American military and economic ships a location to refuel and resupply. This base would become known as Pearl Harbor. Next, we would establish naval bases in the Caribbean. This would allow for control and dominance of the Western Hemisphere. Lastly, we would build a canal in Panama. This would make the trip from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean much quicker. You no longer had to travel around the tip of South America in order to get to the Pacific Ocean. This increased naval response time and allowed us to defend both shores of the United States.
The second factor that fueled imperialism was the search for new markets. Industrialization had allowed mass production of products across America. The United States now had a surplus of goods and needed new places to sell them. The first step involved the raw materials that would come from the different territories that the United States would acquire. With given access to more resources and inputs, these raw materials would fuel continued mass production, profit, and growth. Then, the United States would engage in international trade. Using the raw materials from their territories, they can export more American goods to foreign markets, preventing waste and ensuring profits.
The final reason is our belief in cultural superiority. The ideas of progressivism, such as morality and Christianity, factored into our drive to build an empire. America's British background made it natural for us to build empires. The British had spent centuries spreading its borders and colonizing most of the world. We felt it was in our destiny to follow in their footsteps. Also, social Darwinism, or survival of the fittest, left the United States on top of the world's civilized nations. Because we were the best, it's our duty to civilize inferior cultures and reform them.
In the later half of the 1800s, as Americans progressed and improved society at home, we began to balance our affairs internationally across the world stage. Americans felt it was time for isolationism to be over. The United States had grown so powerful that it was time to expand. The age of imperialism would lead to war and would dominate foreign policy for decades to come. It's because of this era that the United States finally becomes a world power for the first time in its history. And the status we rise to during the imperialistic age leads us to where we sit in the world today.
Children, next I'll explain emergence of middle class and working class. The independence movement facilitated transfer of political authority, but it engendered no social or economic change. With the mass excluded from the decision-making process, political became the preserve of oligarchic family and military cliques. From the middle of the 19th century, oligarchic republics based on alliances of regional elites began to operate. Brazil remained the exception until the monarch fell in 1889. With political stability and economic opportunity, the country received large number of migrants from southern Europe. Economic growth, urbanization, and industrial growth in countries like Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico helped consolidate a whole of middle class and the emergence of militant working class organizations. At the same time, American power and wealth came dominate Central and South America. Great Depression in South America. Situation created by the Great Depression made it impossible for oligarchic regimes to accommodate the rising expectations of several assertive groups. In Mexico, there was violent social protest involving dissatisfied segments of the oligarchy, middle class, intellectuals, and peasant communities. Elsewhere, electoral reform enabled newer social groups to obtain political powers through the ballot box. Latin America protested American intervention and disliked the dollar imperialism. Define dollar imperialism is an important short answer. Students, note it down. Dollar imperialism, the term used to describe the policy of the USA in maintaining and dominating over distant lands through economic aid. The opposition to political intervention produced a change in US policy after 1933. Franklin Roosevelt, in this good neighbor policy, agreed that the US would not intervention in the internal affairs of any state and would give economic and technical assistance to Latin America. Children, now we are going to end of this session. I hope you are all observing the class properly, isn't it? Well done. Children, today's homework, note it down. Book back short answer and paragraph question. Study properly and write 2 times. Once again, today's homework, book back short answer and paragraph question. Study properly and write 2 times. Okay? Thank you, children. See you next class.